as well as increased job scarcity across the African continent. This study, which focused on Kenya, found that, and I quote, the clean cooking sector is estimated to provide about 19,000 direct formal jobs and potentially 15 to 35,000 direct informal jobs in 2019. While the clean cooking sector provided many jobs, the level of compensation and retention is low. In the LPG and electric cooking sector, sales and distribution are the biggest parts of the workforce, while for bioethanol and biogas, manufacturing and assembly is dominant. The majority of the clean cooking sector's direct formal workforce is reported to be skilled. Management, finance, and legal, as well as product development and research, are the most difficult skills to recruit for. Women's participation is lower than 30% of the clean cooking sector studied, and women can be found more in managerial positions than non-managerial positions. So while we're here discussing enabling policies, financing, and business models to achieve universal access to clean cooking, we must also discuss if we have the skilled workforce to deliver. This includes talent to design, to manufacture, distribute, and maintain the clean cooking appliances and fuels, as well as talent to drive innovation on policy and financing. Scaling the clean cooking sector is a massive economic opportunity with the potential to create millions of decent jobs across its diverse value chains, including in remote communities that need economic activity the most, and for women and youth who are most affected by the lack of clean cooking jobs, or clean cooking access, excuse me. So my name is Davina Ngay, and I'm the communications manager at GWNet, which is the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition. I'll be your moderator for today, and our session is Growing People, Growing Businesses, Growing Economies, which seeks to focus on talent gaps and opportunities in the clean cooking workforce with the goal of identifying solutions to unlock the employment opportunities across our different countries. By the end of this session, we aim to better understand, 1, the economic opportunities of clean cooking, 2, the job opportunities associated with the sector and the skills and talent gap this has highlighted, and 3, solutions to ensure that the necessary workforce to provide affordable, accessible, clean cooking access to billions of people around the world is there. And today I have with me an amazing panel, and I ask you to warmly welcome them as they come onto stage. First, we have Keegan Shalimo. He's the principal with Open Capital, which is a leading management consulting and financial advisory firm in Africa. So at Open Capital, where Keegan works, he leads a team working with organizations to design strategies, develop scalable solutions, and prepare for growth. In 2018, Keegan co-founded Arcadia, which is an innovative open capital service where he led the design of Arcadia's coaching and talent management model. Arcadia provides young university graduates and professionals with intensive training, coaching, and mentoring, and places them on a 3 to 6 month rotating secondments. Next, we have Sarah Steva. So Sarah is the Sequest Capital Country Director in Tanzania, the Gambia, and Zimbabwe, where she's committed to transforming the lives of rural communities. Sarah is an experienced international and domestic development practitioner, awarded national recognition for team building, fiscal integrity, and outstanding emergency response planning in the United States. At Sequest Capital, Sarah specializes in opening new countries of operation and supporting high-performing teams to deliver exceptional results. And lastly, we have Adaku Ufere. Welcome to the stage, Adaku. Adaku is the chief party of the USAID-funded Power Africa, West Africa Energy Program. This is an initiative supporting 23 countries in West and Central Africa in the supply of and access to affordable and grid-connected electricity services through technical assistance, capacity building, and transaction support. Adaku is an award-winning energy, gender, and development attorney with extensive experience leading multicultural teams in the implementation of energy projects in Africa. So welcome, Adaku, welcome, Sarah, welcome, Keegan, to the stage. So I think to set the scene, I'll ask a question to each one of you, and we can start with Keegan and move along the line. So what did the job opportunities in the clean cooking sector look like, and what are the type of roles available?
Thank you, Davina, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking. I know it's the last session of the day, so we'll try to make it as interesting as talent is, and in many ways a reality that the very many organizations working in clean cooking are not just entities in themselves and technologies. I know that's a big discussion that's being had, technology, finance, and everything. But if we really boil it down, it's people who are making these run. And that means that talent is as much a central point of how these organizations will operate. When we think about the opportunities, it spans really across different dimensions. So we think of the leadership teams. Who are the people running these organizations? How do you build leadership capability? How do you think about the next layer, management, and the support that happens there, and then the frontline teams, the operational level, how that works? And we see opportunity across each of these levels. As Davina mentioned, represent Open Capital. We're a management consulting and advisory firm, and really have been at the forefront of thinking about talent solutions for different organizations since 2010. A key theme there is we've helped many organizations we've helped many of them with strategy, with raising capital. We've done over $1.1 billion of capital now, but a key theme is you can give them strategy, you can give them capital, but if you can't find the right people to execute, then all that's useless. And 2, 3, 5 years later, you come back and there's no real solution. So maybe I'll pause there, we'll come back and give more, but these are some of the realities and opportunities in the sector.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thanks, Davina. Thanks, Keegan. Great to see everyone out here stretching our conference muscles after a little bit of time away due to the pandemic. So to address the question, in terms of job roles and a little bit of background about myself and the organization I come from. So Sequest Capital is a social impact organization whose first touch point with our end consumer is through the clean cooking technologies. But our ultimate mission and goal as an organization is for full transformational change to that last mile. And so when we're looking and talking about talent, a lot of what I will be discussing today and sharing with you is that last mile talent. How do we identify and include individuals within that last mile that both support the organization and the mission that we're trying to achieve, as well as the end consumer? And while a lot of the conversations are around challenge and trying to say that we have the capital, we have the resources, how do we identify these people? When we Sequest are working within that last mile, we actually feel like there's a lot more opportunity than challenges. So I'm really excited to share some of those with you today and also answer any questions you have later.
Thank you, Sarah. Daku?
Right, thank you very much. So as for available opportunities in clean cooking, I think we have the regular ones. So sales and distribution in LPG, policy is also very important. And I speak as I was originally an oil and gas lawyer. Now I'm an energy development and gender lawyer. So these are roles that did not exist in the legal structure probably like 100 years ago. So I'm looking forward to the day someone brands themselves as a clean cooking lawyer, because that's coming. So policy making, very important, because we have all these measures, and then to implement them becomes a problem. So we need a very strict and strong regulatory system, and the people to put that in place will be in very high demand. Another job sector that is usually overlooked is monitoring and evaluation. Now, for a relatively new sector, it's very important to have indicators, to set targets, to be able to count actual results, to show the impact of what's being done. Because if you're not able to do that, how do you prove? Yes, we know clean cook stoves help health, all of that, but you need actual numbers to be able to generate the funding that comes with it. So these are the job sectors that I know should matter. I mean, regardless of the normal technicians and engineers and all of that, these ones that are frequently overlooked are definitely very important. And to speak more broadly on, I would say, renewable energy, I've started to see an uptick in a very interesting role, energy transition expert. which really doesn't really exist because nobody's really an expert right now. But then it's a genuine job role who with you already work in fossil fuels, you already have an idea how to make that transition, and you can brand yourself as that expert once you've obviously done the necessary research. I know universities are starting to create courses for energy transition. This didn't exist when I studied oil and gas law in Aberdeen about 10 years ago. So these are, like I said, just overlooked job sectors that I think people, especially if you're looking to get into clean cooking and you want to set yourself apart a bit, if you're not an engineer, if you're not a technical person, these are the other type of supporting roles that you can explore.
Thank you for setting the scene. And if we can just speak more broadly about the renewable energy sector, Daku. Based on your experience working in West and Central Africa, what do you see as the potential impact of clean energy jobs on a country's economy?
So the World Economic Forum has said that by 2030, we should have about 10 million clean energy jobs globally. And this is supposed to offset the about 2-point-something million that's going to be lost by fossil fuels. And like I said earlier in the scene setter, that the people who are leaving fossil fuels are the best people to fill the clean energy jobs because they have the most transferable skills right now, if we're being honest. And the impact of that is going to be felt, I feel, in sectors like electricity efficiency, power generation, automotive sectors, and again, not restricted to technical people, because people like to feel, once they hear about STEM jobs, only an engineer can fill that. I'm a lawyer. I've been working in energy for over a decade in different areas of it. So you're going to go all across the value chain, operation, maintenance, chemical production, distribution, all of that will impact the talent sector that we're seeing. So fossil fuel is going to lose a lot of jobs, or all of those people are going to be able to make that transition. And so we're going to see an uptick in diverse supply chains, increased labor intensity, increased net profit margins. And I'll say specifically for Africa, something because we're still going to be reliant on gas for quite a while. So something we're definitely going to see is that there's going to be a bit of cushioning from the fluctuations in the oil prices. Once you have renewable energy to fall back on, we're no longer so subject to the volatility of oil prices.
Thank you for that. And just drawing upon what you said, because you've talked about fossil fuels, and we can't really talk about clean cooking without talking about where we've come from, which is the traditional and more polluting energy sources, which are still commonly used. So to Sarah, what trends have you seen in the shift from current roles within the traditional fuels, traditional cooking sector, to roles within clean cooking?
It's a really great question. So in terms of last mile, what we often see is that with the availability of clean cooking, a lot of individuals are coming out of very informal employment into a formal role. And so by that, I mean Sequest Capital has a model where we provide a permanent last mile connection to our end user. And those individuals that are filling those roles are either the end users themselves or individuals within the communities. And so that's opening up a large sector of roles for people that would have not had a more formal type of employment. And then when we're talking about shifts in other trends, we see that, as Keegan mentioned in the beginning, all along kind of the growth of the organization. So we typically try to bring folks in through existing networks, current employees, going through various open job announcements. But it's also important to remember that to create a dynamic, empowered workforce, that comes through intersectionality. So my background is particularly in food security and nutrition. I have a lot of colleagues who come from more of the women's health background, and we find that creating that multi-dimensional workforce helps us as an organization have different lenses to different problems to try and address a solution or a problem holistically.
Thank you for that. And Keegan, you've worked across different sectors as part of Open Capital, and we can always draw lessons from different sectors and good practices, best practices. So what can you say based on your experience are some similar challenges and solutions you've seen across different sectors, you've witnessed across different sectors when it comes to talent development that we can draw upon for the clean cooking sector?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think one nuance across sectors is, in as much as the problem that each sector is dealing with is different, the methods are somewhat similar in terms of you need, and these are some of the learnings. One is you need the patience and the commitment to invest through to seeing some results. Now, clean cooking is a very challenging sector. For many years, there were very few alternatives to sustainability, and now we're starting to see carbon and related financing mechanisms coming in. So there's the role of patience in investing in that. And when it comes to talent solutions, there's really a need to understand what type of talent is required. There's a role for generalist talent, so roles that are somewhat more straightforward. Someone working in, say, the agriculture sector, and who knows how to do business planning and strategy and finance and talent management can very easily translate their skills into clean cooking. And these are things that we need to leverage what's already been built and bring those people into the space. What would it take? Attract them. What motivation measures you need to put in place? That's one side of it. Then there's the more specific aspect of talent, the technical skills you need to put in place. So certain types of expertise. We talk about carbon finance. I've seen more recently, for the very first time, talking about a carbon division in an organization. That's, I think, fairly interesting, and a skill set that 2-3 years ago was very niche, and I hadn't seen that as a key talent gap. Now, how do you build the capabilities of people to then be able to do that? And really, the second broad and critical piece is then innovating different models that will help to unlock that. I'm happy to talk about some of the innovations that we are doing, but very much at the nexus of being patient and investing, and then also looking creatively and innovatively at solutions.
Yeah, and you mentioned the talent gap, which is something I mentioned in my opening statement. It's something that is on the description of this event today, this talent gap that we keep on discussing. So what was the talent gap that you saw that led to you setting up Arcadia?
I could talk about this all day, but let me try and keep it brief. And it starts with a story. So started out in management consulting maybe, call it almost a decade ago now. And we worked with a couple of clients, and by that point had done quite a bit, but had helped one client in Malawi unlock about $15 million of capital, another in Ethiopia do a strategy for them, but went back to them 2 years later, and they hadn't made progress. And so in reflection, you're like, okay, I got paid for this work, but is that enough? Are we really seeing the kind of transformation we need to see in the industry? So we started a discussion with the clients, and it was on their side, they didn't have the right people to do it, either because the management teams didn't have the bandwidth, so they didn't have, they were focusing on putting out the 20, 30 fires that senior management tends to be dealing with, or they just didn't have the right skills. And now we come to a paradox we see in Africa, where on one hand, you have all these graduates from university and other institutions coming in and saying, we can't find jobs. And then on the other hand, you have organizations that are saying, well, we can't find the right people to hire. Something's not right, because the two in fact, are true, because the employers are struggling to get people, and the providers of talent, the employees, potential employees, can't find jobs, and there's a big disconnect. And how you bridge that is in thinking about, okay, where do you pick up the conversation with different people? And here I'm talking about what we did with Arcadia was sit down and ask, how could we bridge that? We on our side as Open Capital had been building a talent model where we would recruit from different universities across the continent, build a talent, and then work with them within our firm as the people working with client solutions. Now, what we learned is the model was working, and our clients were coming to us saying, well, can we borrow your analyst to come work for us for 3 months? And what we then did is, after some point of testing, decided, hey, why not? Let's lend out our talent and see what happens. And that proved to be an incredibly successful approach. We then converted it into a model. We now call it Arcadia, where we've done over 200 engagements across more than 10 countries, and continuing to learn how we can innovatively deploy talent in different organizations and really see that as a way of filling some of that talent gap. So maybe I'll pause there. Yeah.
And I think just keeping on this theme, Sarah, because you work in a completely different environment, mostly with rural communities. So what are some of the talent challenges you have faced while trying to deliver clean cooking solutions at the last mile?
Thanks, Davina. And so I mentioned earlier that we typically find more opportunities than challenges, specifically with last mile talent. But I'll quickly go over some of the challenges we have identified, because I think it's important to share and identify those. So obviously, we find that a lot of our talent comes through existing employee referrals or networks. Sometimes that can be a challenge because you create inadvertently kind of an echo silo as your talent knows other talent before joining the organization. And so we do try to work around this by having more open calls for existing roles and more screening in terms of the final selection. And then in terms of, this is more of a management challenge once the teams are eventually on board, but there's the infamous game of telephone that occurs between management and the last mile staff, and that's a two-direction challenge that we do face. And so we try to open up those lines of communication as much as possible so that management is aware of the challenges that are faced, and we try to work with solutions on those as well. In terms of opportunities, we find that the program or the intervention of clean cooking often, sells itself as a position for the existing talent. And so, in more plain language, when individuals go into kitchens and the cook or the end user is showing them the cook stove and the way that it has changed their lives and explaining how it has impacted them, their families, their kids, etc., that individual is very excited by the impact it is having and often wants to find a role within the organization. And so, honestly, our recruitment kind of works for itself, and we're really excited by that.
Thank you for highlighting the challenges and opportunities. And Adaku, hearing Keegan and Sarah speak about the gaps and the challenges that they've faced, what do you see as opportunities for women and for youth within this sector, and how does this enable economic impact at the local level?
So I'm very interested in the agricultural sector, being obviously the foundation, the pipeline that leads to cooking. And I've seen that there are some benefits where job increases in things like harvesting of feedstock and biomass. And in my work, so in Power Africa, we've done some work in the northern part of Ghana where we worked with GIZ to provide grants to smallholder farmers who wanted to purchase like solar-powered boreholes and irrigation and things like that. And we have seen, obviously, with the increase in water available to them, there's obviously an increase in the produce they're able to harvest. So there's more pineapple, cashews, cassava, things like that. And a lot of the jobs to harvest that excess produce is going to the women and children who, or rather youth, who are in the villages who are probably just working at home, but then there's now this, farm that has way more output than it usually would have, and so it's looking for extra hands, and it usually goes to them. So that's a direct benefit that I've seen in my work personally, and this is just on a very small level, because these grants are like $5,000, $10,000 grants. So imagine if that was deployed at a much larger level. How many more people can you employ and impact? And speaking about impacts, we understand the wider effect of access to clean energy. So in terms of education, safety, health, etc. So clearly, if there's solar-powered street lighting, streets are safer, so women can go out at night if they have to do night jobs. Reduction of carbon poisoning if they're able to use clean cook stoves, reduction of time poverty by eliminating the distance they have to go to get firewood and water, and obviously girls' education. So when you eliminate all those problems by obviously access to energy, then you create a completely new labor force that did not exist before, who are more educated, more aware, and obviously able to harness whatever economic opportunities that come their way.
And I think you've done a really great job of explaining the economic opportunity available, but at the same time, we still have the talent gap that we keep on discussing. So in your experience, how do we enable talent across all areas of clean cooking, trying to bridge this gap?
I think governments play a huge role in that. A lot of people tend to think they rely on a lot of international development funding. So there's the sector is awash with money and consultants and all of that. But then if the government isn't part and parcel and working with these people hand in hand, you really can't do much. You just present your 120-page report and fly back to DC, and then nothing's done at the end of the day. So having, again, policy as a lawyer, policy is very important to me, because you cannot just, because I'm a consultant now and I make recommendations all day. But if there's no policy underpinning that to implement these recommendations I've made, I've wasted my time and the government's time and the people's time, because they're expecting you to do this work. So government is obviously the best mechanism to create those incentives, to create financing measures. And besides policy, obviously another important one that's very dear to me is funding. Obviously women, historically underfunded. And there's not a lot. What are you going to give like a low-level, small-scale solar home system provider? What's she going to do with a 120-page report? That's none of her business. She wants money. So if the government can create, find a way to fund these local businesses, that will go a long way in helping them. Because, even getting access to grant funding, they're going to have to write proposals. They don't have time for that. So they need shortcuts, so to speak, and only their national government can make that happen. Another thing I think is maybe slightly controversial, especially in Africa, is imposing taxes on harmful environmental practices. So if you own, wastewater plants that tends to, dump something by the way, there's a special tax for that. And then on the flip side, having maybe tax rebates for meeting green standards. I think those things would go a long way and help. Obviously, besides giving funds to small-scale businesses, government funding, research institutes, academic institutions, you don't always have to wait for the foreign government to come and help you out. You have the money. Instead of buying new cars for all your members of parliament, you could divert that money somewhere else. There's also, again, agriculture. Food security is very important to me. And I've seen, I think this is in Pakistan, I believe, the government has created $1 billion grant. It's supposed to be paid out over 4 years for afforestation to reduce carbon. And that's set to create about thousands of new low-level jobs. The high-level people with the masters and the PhDs, they're always going to have jobs. But these low-level skilled workers, they're jumping from, contract to contract. So a government that invests in that labor force is a very important government. And I know, particularly in our side of the world, short-termism in political durations doesn't always help, because everybody's thinking only in the concept of what can I do in the next 4 years, and not what can I do to help the country in the next 20 years, because in 20 years they won't be in power, it's none of their business, which is where policy, again, comes into play. Because if you have those policies laid down, if you have the sector planning, the held down guidelines, it's not very difficult, but it's a little difficult for a new government to come in and say, okay, we're not doing this anymore, I'm keeping all that grant money for myself. So, yeah, that's how.
I think that's an amazing call to action to anyone here who's working with the government. If we're looking for scalability, it needs to be top down.
Before, this is a question on policy, because I think when I think talent, we've really struggled, because the talent we get coming out of institutions across Africa at this point is really a big challenge. And maybe because you've played a role in the policy space, is like, how can we start to shift that? Because it's a real challenge.
Are you saying the talent is poor?
No, and actually that's the point, is like, from a raw capability standpoint, the talent is equal to anything you would find globally. The issue is that our institutions just are not preparing them well enough. So where do we start from that standpoint?
Because I was going to take that personally, because I went to the University of Nigeria, and if you're going to say the talent is poor, that's a dig. I think because our institutes here are more respectful of foreign degrees. So not just actual foreigners, but even people from here who have foreign degrees and move back home. And so you have to instill, I don't know if it's national pride, I don't know what it is, I don't know if it's a quota system, but find a talent pipeline, sort of the way they had in the 60s and the 70s, like right after independence, where they made sure there were jobs waiting in the federal civil service from people that came right from university, and then they put them in those places. I don't think those exist anymore, at least I've never heard of them. So if you start to retain a local quota for local people coming out of local universities and, local polytechnics and all of that, I think that could help. Because then they know they're not going to, have to fight for jobs with people with degrees from like Oxford or something, which they would not be able to match up against with a local degree. That's difficult. An employer would take the Oxford, graduate over, I don't know, a University of Ghana graduate, which is very sad, especially as that person has the on-ground skills that they need, but they believe that the foreign degree is more valuable. So again, this is where government comes in again. Government has to mandate this. Government has to implement this. Government has to watchdog it and make sure people don't abuse it.
Yeah, we shall take this separately, but I think I'm still cautious on where government can be as a big player, but yes.
Yes, I think you still need some convincing, but I think something you mentioned which is key is the respect of institutions. You see it in Kenya as well, and when it comes to finance, there's one university. If you're hiring from a bank, that's the one university that they will hire from, no other university, and it's the respect of the institution. That falls to the respect of the graduates of the institution, and we need to, government can push this respect by funding, by capacity building. I think policy is quite key, but you might need some more convincing.
I agree the role of policy. It's the question of how do we actually make it work. If we're talking clean cooking, like how do we make it work for clean cooking? Who are the people we need to be speaking to start this process?
Yeah, maybe you can give us the view from the private sector. So you've started Arcadia, and you've talked about some of the services you offer to build graduates through coaching and mentoring and talent development. So what are some of the key successes you've seen through Arcadia? And do you see the expansion of Arcadia into addressing some of the talent shortages in clean cooking? Because this is not an area you're currently working in.
So, and I'll speak a bit about what we do through Arcadia. So Arcadia does talent placements, where we embed short-term talent for 3 to 6 months with different organizations, where the mandate of the person who's going in is really what I like to say, just get things done. You're going in and your focus is, this needs to be done. It's a project that needs to be implemented. You need analysis done. You need work done. And so we come in as that plug to help move things forward. So what we've learned through that process is that the different organizations have certain unique needs, which are what you need, the technical side of it, but then there are certain standard components that need to be put in place. Putting in place the right finance mechanisms, that's across all clean cooking technologies going to hold true. So you need a CFO, you need better systems to track data. I like what Adaku mentioned on like M&E. How do you make sure that the information you're getting is actually accurate, reliable, timely, and that you can actually use that to make decisions? Without that, all the business models and technologies that we're talking about likely end up being guesswork. So, and we don't want to do that. We want to use the right information to make better decisions, and so invest in that. And then ultimately for what we're doing through Arcadia, also looking ahead at how do you expand this. So we're very sector agnostic. We've worked across agriculture, renewable energy, clean cooking and LPG and other related spaces as well. But where we're now thinking about is there are people who need very specialist technical support. We've not been set up to provide that. There's a real opportunity to really deepen that impact. Or frontline operational staff, how do you give them more capabilities beyond just, this is my role, this is all I need to do, but also starting to think creatively and offer solutions that can then be scaled up within the organization. So maybe that's how we think about it.
And Sarah, I have a two-part question for you. So through Sequest, how do you ensure support and growth of talent through appropriate recruitment at all levels of your organization? And then if you can share some initiatives you have taken to find and support talent as you've expanded your workforce inclusively.
Again, some great questions. So I'll go to the second one first because I find it exciting. So in terms of expanding talent, often we find that there can be barriers to entry at the last mile. So a lot of that is the physical assets of, the smartphones, the power banks, et cetera. And in terms of bringing those people on board, that begins from a leadership place and from the first point of connection with that individual during the interview. So what questions are we asking as leaders within the organization? And what space are we giving for the talent to tell us what their needs are? And that space needs to be different based on that individual because each of us have different ways of expressing our needs. And so we need to be inclusive around that. So first we identify the barriers of entry, and we can tailor those for that individual. For example, we have several staff in Tanzania who are young women between the ages of, let's say, early 20s to early 30s, and they really, really wanted to work within the clean cooking sector. We loved their skills, and the barrier to entry was really having a driver's license. So is your organization identifying those barriers to entry and providing solutions for them? Are they, providing motorcycle training to increase the competence level of those staff? And until you get to a point where that staff member who is having immense impact on your business feels comfortable driving a motorcycle on their own, on very rural roads? Are you hiring, the motorcycle drivers to support them along that way? So I think we need to be creative with the solutions for the talent that is existing, and as companies and as managers, be open to providing tailored solutions to welcome that existing talent into a workforce that obviously is very, very ready for it.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And I think now we can probably turn towards the audience and get some Q&A. So yes, if you have a question for our panelists, or if you have experience with talent challenges within your workspace, and maybe you've come up with some solutions that work for you and you just want to share with the audience, now is the time. So there's some mics going around, and yeah, we can take some questions now.
All right, so thank you very much. Basically, I am in Ghana and I'm an advocate. I ended up as a banking student and realized that climate change is a real issue, and I wanted to be part of the solutions. So I decided to be part of renewable energy campaigns, whereby I believe in the grassroots a lot, because through their traditional ways, they have innovative ideas as well. And when I went into those grassroots, I realized that our women, if you give them a reason to transform from what they are doing into renewable energy, they are able to also share with you their thoughts and their experiences. And then you give them the hands-on opportunity on what clean cooking is and how it's beneficial to their health and other spaces. And in terms of students, you tell them that there is this opportunity to venture into green jobs. So I think with this topic on growing people and growing businesses and growing economics, it's important for us to look into the grassroots and not isolate it from the government, because it's their responsibility and they are supposed to be part of these solutions. So whenever we go into these grassroots, we make sure that the policymakers are also there to listen to these women through their local dialects when they are also giving out these solutions. So my question to you is that, how are we able to bring all these players together in solving these problems? Thank you.
Thank you. Someone wants to take it?
Take that. So that's done through community engagement. And I know you mentioned the aspect of local dialects. Obviously, when we work in countries where there's a diverse language, you have people on staff who can speak those. A lot of people are hired specifically for the fact that they can speak Twi or Fante or any of the local languages in Ghana. And we have a whole community engagement structure where we know we go into the communities. You speak first, obviously, to the community leaders, because those are the people that will convene the people. You have it out with them, and then we do a lot of stakeholder engagements. We also work with, and when I say we, I'm talking about Power Africa. We work with civil society organizations who are fantastic at that sort of grassroots local organizing, which we don't always have the capability to do, being a foreign-funded institution. So that's being done. Nobody really just goes into a community and just starts working without having consulted everybody on ground, gotten their consent, because a lot of these places are traditional stool grounds. You can't go in and do work unless you have the permission of like the chief and whoever is the important person in that community. So that is definitely always at the forefront of everything we're doing in rural communities.
Yep. And maybe to also pick up on that thread from our context, interesting enough, also funded through some work under the US government, is in Uganda, we took, because the question you're asking is, how do you bring different players to work together? And in Uganda, what we did is, it's in the context of the renewable energy sector, where a lot of the solar players and everyone was essentially working in silo and doing their own thing. And we realized that there's an opportunity to bring everyone to the table and have them speak to each other in a certain way. And so we played an instrumental role in setting up what we call the Uganda Off-Grid Market Accelerator, UOMA for short. And what that is essentially a platform that brings different actors, public sector, private sector, the development sector, to all have a shared understanding of where the market is, think about what it needs to be and what needs to be done, and then as well have an open platform to keep each other aware of what everyone else is doing. And so started that, I think it was 2016, 2017, and have been working on that to date, where the focus has been with public sector. It's a question of what are all the policy and related topics that need to be discussed. And then with private sector, they're doing their standard business, like they will sell, they'll go last mile, they'll do all that, but then there are cross-cutting issues that then they can escalate through UOMA and discuss with everyone, and that becomes easy to move forward. Then with the development sector, there are bigger problems that everyone understands, but which private sector would not do. Public sector will take I would love to do it, but I don't have the money, and so if development sector can help, that would be awesome. But then again, different funders have different priorities, and if they all have a shared understanding, then it's easier to actually make that happen. So I think there are ways to bring people together to work on problems, and I think it's starting to look at making that consistent even in the clean cooking sector.
I think Sarah will answer the question, and then we can move on to the two hands I can see.
Okay, great. It's a very big question and a very good one. And if it was already answered, we obviously wouldn't all be here together in the same room. But I think from experience, we work in different layers and in different silos, right? And so the question of how do we get everyone in the same room? But it's bigger than that. It's how do we get everyone in the same room in many, many times over and over again, and speaking to them in a way that they can hear and connects with their motivation, right? So different ministries have different priorities and different lenses. I can't tell you how many times I've had a group of stakeholders, whether it's national or local, come in to see programs and say, wow, I had no idea, this was happening. I'm so impressed you're advancing all this work we're trying to do. And so the clean cooking space really does overlap with so many other objectives within so many different parallel silos. And it's really just getting that message out there. But that is the challenge to all of us in that room. So thanks.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And I think something key you also mentioned during your question was the advocacy, how the women and youth were very willing to take the economic opportunity once they heard it was there. And I think that's a big thing to address when we're talking about solving or bridging the talent gap. Because if people know that there is the clean cooking sector and it's set to grow and there are going to be jobs, of course they're going to go and study in university or in the polytechnic, or they're going to self-study where they can and try and gain these skills because they know there's the economic opportunity available. So advocacy is definitely key. And I saw two hands on this side.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you to all the panelists. I was able to grab quite a bit from each of you. Khadija, I'm coming from Malawi, and I have a question for you, Adaku. You've mentioned a lot about how policy is key with regard to, bridging those gaps. Malawi is a country that is great at writing policies. Implementation is our problem. You often find that you either have competing policies or strategies with different ministries, or you'll have the lack of enforcement of something great in one of the policies, and so that's what's causing the gap in terms of the implementation. I'm now finding myself in a role where I have to offer advisory to the government, where you find that oftentimes you'll see one policy says this, but then the other one from another ministry is stopping this particular objective of this policy from happening, and you can never get them in a room together to just sit and figure it out. It has to be, I have to go to this office and that office and that office and that office. How do you address that? How do you tackle that so that that disconnect is no longer there in a way that I guess is probably diplomatic, because this is also touching on political will as well. It's touching on exactly what you were saying about how everybody's looking at their 4 or 5 years and then, after that, it's none of their business. But at the end of the day, nobody's thinking about the 20, 50, 30, 100-year goals. So what is it that can happen in that instance? And I'm coming from a development partner role, so at the same time, I'm also having to think about coming from, donor funding as well, and don't push too much, but then, how do you assist so that there's that ownership from the government and there's that continuity so that their policies are not competing against each other?
And perhaps before you take that, Adaku, there is another lady. Yes, if you could ask your question.
Yes, hi, hello. I'm Sarah Rashid. I'm the Deputy Energy Lead at 60 Decibels. So my question, you guys all talked a lot sort of about how we can do a better, or how the sector can do a better job of bringing in, young female talent, more local talent into the clean cooking space. And what I'd love to hear you all expand on a bit is sort of what then happens after that, right? So how do we think about, increasing promotion, advancement, other additional opportunities so that these young women, these local, the local talent as well is able to rise up in the ranks and become the people who may ultimately also be helping making decisions about sort of the trajectory of the sector in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Perhaps Adaku, you could start.
I think she's going to have to repeat her question for me, but let me just answer this real quick. So your thing was how to enforce and implement national policies. Now, that is a problem I'm not sure when it's going to be solved, because it's a problem everybody has, right? But a way that we found, not to circumvent, but to kind of help it along, is with regional work, regional policies. So ECOWAS has been great. ECOWAS and the West African Power Pool has been really, really good, and this is, in the general power sector, in helping us enforce national policies. So yes, we do have that issue where there are competing ministries or even competing directorates within one ministry who have different regulations, and it's almost impossible to make it cohesive. But if we can get a regional policy that where there's a conflict, that one trumps it, that usually helps. A great example that I've seen is with the Mano River Union. So it's this is Sierra Leone, I think Liberia, Guinea, and I've seen where the Mano River Union kind of helps to guide these countries along. I think I went to one of their conferences a few years ago, and I saw where they came together after that conference, and they had a list of guide points after the conference that each country had to implement and enforce. And we really did see, it wasn't an acceleration, but there was some growth in helping that move along, because they are very, I would say, if a president doesn't want to do something in his own national interest, he's helped along if other countries in his region have agreed to it, and there's a regional body kind of guiding that. So for Southern Africa, and you have the Southern Africa Power Pool, I'm not sure whether that regional organization is out there, but here in West Africa, ECOWAS has been a great partner with helping to implement national policies. Like I said, the West African Power Pool, the different ECOWAS agencies, ERERA, ECRI, like I said, the MRU, the Mano River Union. So these are regional, honestly, is the way to go. Because I oversee 23 countries in West and Central Africa, and I could not do that if I had to work with every single country. So if I have someone at WAPO, I can go down to ERERA here in Ghana or ECRI in Cape Verde. They can help me say, okay, let's get everybody together on the table, and we'll make them do what they need to do. And they usually listen.
Thank you for pointing out the regional consensus and cohesion is critical if we're to move forward. And I think the second question, you were a bit low, but I believe you're talking about how we could advance and upskill the talent we already have.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if me being closer is any better, but yeah, essentially, how do you upskill, how do you keep advancing these young women who might be coming into the clean cooking sector, or young local talents, so that they're also growing and scaling in their careers, as we hope this does as well?
Yeah.
I'm happy to start off, in part because I think one of the visions behind setting up Arcadia on our side was the reality that talent is, so you want to see progression, you want to see growth. Many of the people don't just want static roles and want to see that growth over time. And the reality is it's a function of creating that opportunity. So while we are a consulting firm, or started out as a pure consulting firm, and remain true to that dimension, we also realize that solving some of the challenges in Africa will require building a broader base of skilled talent that can then transition into different organizations and continue to make change in that way. The way we've seen it work, and work quite well, is that you need to set the guardrails of progression. So what does it take to get to the next level? What are the things that someone needs to demonstrate for them to get to a supervisory role, a management role, and then a sort of more senior role? And what are the expectations? And then looking at how can you then cultivate the opportunities and make it possible for someone to start out in frontline staff, and then as they demonstrate capability, prepare them for management and say, you're actually doing well. And that requires a performance evaluation system that also enables that progression of talent. So as someone's doing well, then you start supporting them to build the next level skills. And what is often overlooked is the reality that talent progression is not just about someone doing well in one role, they'll obviously do well in the next. It's actually preparing them for that. So if it means that they need to take on more people management capabilities, take them through training, support them to engage in that, and then as they demonstrate competence, take them to the next level and do that. And it might be that only a fraction of the people get to go through the different layers, but in reality, as long as you're seeing that progression, I think that's a key part. Now, I'll speak about the gender dynamic as well, being that I think talent and capability is evenly distributed across genders, across different age groups and the likes. Opportunity is not. And I think we need to really work on making sure that opportunity is equally presented to different groups. I like what Sarah mentioned about if a key impediment to a certain gender getting the opportunity is a specific item, being conscious of that and taking intentional measures. The driver's license is actually an interesting one, because if that's the impediment, then let's see how to implement that and make it possible, and all the supporting pieces that go along with it. So that's how we've seen it.
Yeah, I was actually gearing up to kind of not attack you, but be like, what are you saying? Because you did not mention in the beginning, because you're giving these general rules, which obviously everybody needs in a corporate environment, but the rules are very different for women. So I'm very glad you had that last paragraph, because then I calmed down. And I was like, there's no need for wahala, no need for fighting here. But yes, obviously, the same rules don't exist for men and women. And I will speak as someone who is 7 months pregnant. In a couple months, I'm going to go off, on parental leave for 3 months. No man needs to take 3-4 months off work, right? And the period in which I'm going to go off work is when performance evaluations happen in my company. And so my company, because I work for a consulting company, Deloitte, and then I'm posted out to USAID and Power Africa. And Deloitte has made a special provision to have performance evaluation for me before I go on leave. So I'm not, because I could miss it if I'm not around. And so when you say like the driver's license thing, you see an impediment, you see a problem, and then you solve it before it becomes an issue. And obviously, if only 50% of your workforce has that issue, sometimes you don't think it's a priority. So why are these women always leaving the office, But we need to create more people so more people can work. And that's a value that I don't think is appreciated. And besides that, and as a woman who's been working in oil and gas, like I said, I was an oil and gas lawyer, my primary job was traveling all around Africa, negotiating production sharing contracts, negotiating oil blocks. And I lived in countries like South Sudan for months at a time, trying to negotiate for an oil block. And in South Sudan, I don't know if you've ever been to Juba, it still has after effects of war. There are very few women in the capital because they've all been moved out, very male-dominated capital. And I was working for a law firm in Equatorial Guinea, and every time I had to travel, they had to make sure 2 male colleagues traveled with me, or else I'd get harassed the whole time. I'd have, men knocking on my door at night at the hotel. I'd have taxi drivers. I wouldn't say they were trying to kidnap me, but, oh, let's go to my house. And if I'm alone, what am I going to do? So my firm had to make that concession to always have someone with me. Even though I was the head of the energy practice, I was a boss, I was a leader, but I needed my subordinate male colleagues to protect me because I couldn't work in Juba alone. And I've been very lucky to have very kind bosses and very amenable organizations, but not everybody is that lucky. And not every organization has the money to fly 2-3 people out when only one person needs to do the job. So it's realizing that half of your workforce have special needs that the other half don't have, and for you to prioritize those needs. Because if everyone had those needs, they would make rules for it. But then they don't, because it's not everybody.
And let's just remember that maternity leave is still work, so no going on break there. But I think this is one of the key questions in terms of continuation of talent within the sector, right? So I discussed barriers to entry and barriers to advancement. So going off what Keegan said earlier, obviously there's that traditional trajectory. We all know, we read about it, we find out about it in university. But making that trajectory known to staff and having them understand what their growth potential and value within the company is very important. Then also to that, I think the advancement conversation is really crucial as a reflective questioning for the leadership of the organization. So reflecting on, how can women advance through the company, and does my company have any barriers to that advancement? And identifying if there are any and working against those to make sure that the talent that we have from the last mile all the way through the organization is reflective of our consumers, which are mostly women here on the continent. And then I think obviously Sequest Capital is a global company, but we are based in the United States. And so I think we need to be very honest and transparent about the history of colonialism on the continent and how that plays into employee relations and being sort of that cultural doula in a way with employees and opening ourselves up for that transparency and conversation of how can I advance within this workforce and what is needed. And adapting culturally for various needs here that would not or may not be the same in the Western context.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And I think that was an excellent question, because we often talk about recruiting people to the clean cooking sector, to renewable energy, and the conversation stops there, because we need to retain them and we need to advance them. But what we're seeing, especially with women, which is the focus of my work, is that they're brought into the energy sector, and soon enough they'll find that the policies are not supportive, and they start leaving. And so when you talk about a talent gap, it's because the talent you've trained, is leaving because there's no policies to support them. So it's really key to look at, as Adaku said, the different groups have different needs. So if you talk about inclusivity, you need to identify what needs these people have and then support them. And I think since we're coming to the end of the session, I can ask each of the panelists one last question, and you can kind of summarize some of the discussions we've had today, some of the key points. So what are the core solutions and support needed to grow inclusive businesses in clean cooking? So core solutions and support needed. And I think I'll start with you, Adaku, and then we can come this way.
So obviously, the expansion of access of women into leadership positions, that is a core tenet of my job personally. So everything I do is always at the intersection of energy and gender. If it's access work, if it's generation, if it's distribution, transmission, whatever it is, we're making sure we're including gender as a cross-cutting activity. And also, I've seen a new, I guess, I'm not sure what newish trend in conferences in ensuring that there's a youth representation. I think I first saw that as Sustainable for All in Kigali, and then Africa Energy Forum in Brussels, and I see here there's also quite a youth contingent. When I was, I mean, still a youth, but when I was a younger youth, there wasn't anything like that. We couldn't get to these conferences because we couldn't travel, we couldn't afford to, and nobody would listen to us, basically. So now to see that organizers are making a concerted effort to ensure that the youth are represented and are here able to learn, able to speak, because they have a lot to teach us as well, that's a great way to make sure you're creating this inclusive, I guess, economy that you're trying to do. Supporting women to be more financially aware. Again, historically underfunded, we need money more than anybody else. And what are these VC stats? Something about how of all the money raised in Africa in 2021, less than 10% of that went to women. I think it's even a lower figure, but don't quote me, I don't have the exact figure. And if you're giving over 90% of VC funds to a certain contingent, they are going to make solutions for people that look like them. And if you want to make it inclusive, you have to include everybody, and not just different sexes, different genders, different orientations, whatever it is that different indigenous types of people. We have thousands of tribes in Africa. Each one has a different way of, water preservation, food growing, different things. All these voices, yes, it might seem like a clamor, but it's the only way to make sure every single person's need is taken care of and not one person kind of overshadows the others. So money, access, that's pretty much it.
Money, access. I would just add a lot of like social, emotional, right? The talent is there. We have seen it. They are empowered. They are on fire. How do we as a sector, as an organization, as leaders, know when to sit down and listen to what the needs are of the talent and find creative, empowering solutions for that gap, and then go from there.
Yep. And I'll pick on both those points and maybe just add one last bit. The role of innovation, just like investing resource in creative solutions, if it is some technical expertise building, if it is a component around helping to increase engagement within the sector, would be somewhat the role, and here I'm speaking more to the development partners and financiers in the space, just the role of patience and being willing to take that risk before private sector can take that risk, before government is ready to really do that, and playing a role in opening up that talent investment where more should have been done in other spaces, but I think this is the reality, and so how do you then play a bigger role in unlocking that? So that's I think where the biggest focus will be.
Thank you. And I think what I've gotten from what you said is we need to identify the key gaps when we're talking about talent. We need to provide access to the opportunities we've identified. We need to fund innovation, and we need to fund capacity for underrepresented groups within the clean cooking sector. And then that's when we can start to bridge this gap and grow these skills that we desperately need within the sector. Thank you so much, Daku, Sarah, Keegan, for being here today, for sharing your insight, your experience, for challenging each other today. And thank you so much, Rose Atkinson from CCA organized this panel today. So ask for a warm round of applause for Rose and for our panelists. I'd like to also thank everyone for taking the time. I know it's been a very, very long day. Thank you for remaining engaged, for filling up the room. I hope we were able to answer some of the questions we highlighted right at the beginning and just illuminated what talent gaps and talent opportunities within clean cooking look like. So right before we leave, I have one more announcement. The Clean Cooking Alliance is creating support to venture catalyst companies through a people building block, enabling access to 3 technical assistance providers, including MPA advisors, Accenture Development Partners, and Amani Institute, to support the breadth of talent and inclusion challenges that ventures face and help them find the right solutions as they scale. So if you're interested in this and finding out more about this, please visit the CCA booth at the Innovation Expo tomorrow at 1 p.m. And since it's the end of the day, we're going to have some closing remarks, and I'd like to invite on stage Kande Yulkela.
Thank you very much. We again want to commend CCA for bringing all of us together here for a common cause. We have covered a lot today. We've covered the role of governments, the role of the private sector. How do we create this ecosystem to scale up interventions in the clean cooking space? We have a lot to do. As we mentioned this morning, we're attracting now anywhere from 130 to 200 $1 million investment in the clean cooking space. We need $6 billion per year. So you can see that we're just starting the journey, and we need everybody to join this advocacy to help governments and mobilize more voices in the various countries. I see a lot of young people. I like the last session. Apple, you don't remember, but I organized the conference in 2019 that you and Andrew Haskovitz came to for the Man River Union. Yes, you helped us with the funding from Power Africa. But I like the last session you were talking about, talent. That's when I came in. If we have to scale up to cover the 2.4 billion people without clean cooking solutions, or we go from 200 million to 6 billion, you're so right, we need talent. So maybe part of what CCA with partners we have to begin to do is to begin to map out those talents that we're going to need over time by region. I like your regional approach, but also sometimes in some of the countries we're working in. There's going to be need for quite a bit of talent. There's going to be need for support for entrepreneurship development. Maybe there's some lessons we can learn from the off-grid solution. 15, 20 years ago, it was the same headache. Will we have people who understand solar technology? Will there be people who are ready to install the technology in the houses as we were promoting off-grid solutions? Somehow, incentives were provided. More awareness was created. People became curious about solar power. But even in that space, we still need talent for the maintenance. Now we're having a lot of problems with maintenance issues, even in the off-grid market space. But maybe there's some learning between the clean cooking community and those dealing with off-grid solar to see what kind of lessons we can learn from them, how skills were developed over time. I believe we need to reach to the vocational technical education centers. I see in my country quite a bit of interest in those technical institutions about solar technologies, and I think we can also tap into them to spread the knowledge about solutions we need for the clean cooking space as well. But the talent mapping, tailored courses in schools, I like what CCA is doing in Ghana now on the essay competition, just to create awareness in the schools and in the universities already about this problem that we have for lack of access to clean cooking solutions. Women, affirmative action. I'm a strong believer in affirmative action. If we leave it to the likes of me, it will not happen. We put it on the wayside. It's the last thing we think about. But it is important also to get women into politics. I left the UN, and 5 years now I've been in Parliament. I was fighting for a 30% quota for women as a law, that at least 30% of our representatives should be women, and it didn't pass. But I can see the need for that will we have more political leaders, women political leaders, in that policy space. A number of the policies we will enact, and also the programs we develop, will not be sensitive to the needs of women. And yes, more women and children are dying from household air pollution. We need their voices in this space. We need them in leadership roles in the countries, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Health, to be able to design the programs that will be sensitive to some of the issues you've been discussing. Otherwise, they will be left out. It becomes natural when we guys are sitting just to talk about what needs to be done for us. So we need more women leaders. It's not an easy thing for women to get into politics, but I encourage young females and so on, be activists, join the fight, and especially on this issue. I believe that clean cooking cuts across. I mentioned this morning in one of the panels, if you look at value addition along the agricultural value chain from post-harvest in West Africa, I don't want to talk about East Africa, but in West Africa, most of the processing after the farm gate is done by women. And of course, you go to our markets, it's the women there. All of those processes require energy interventions, and a lot of it is firewood and charcoal. So this is also, clean cooking is about women's empowerment, and so designing those technologies that will empower them or enhance their productivity, keep them safe, would require their input. There's one good example in India. There is a group called SIWA, Self-Employed Women's Association. In my days at the UN, I used to visit them in Gujarat, where the current Prime Minister is from. They had it's one of the largest women's organizations in Asia. The time I visited them, it was about 2.5 million members. But what they did that I really liked was that they had a relationship with technology designers, because India has original equipment manufacturers. And I actually saw them advising those technology manufacturers for solar systems and so on, irrigation pumps that were specifically designed to take into consideration women's needs, where they put the handle. Even the cook stoves. I visited some of their centers in Gujarat. So bringing women into the innovation space, partnering with some of these inventors of solutions, even business packages that will benefit women, I think is going to be crucial. So I just want to say, reinforce some of what I heard here. But affirmative action is necessary. I've been in politics, as I say, 5 years now. It's very hard. So I don't recommend it for everybody, but we should get involved, especially the next generation. However, we need more women voices in those space. One of the things I have tried to do, and I failed twice, but I'm going to be stubborn, I want to bring the First Ladies' voices into this space, to the clean cooking. I saw them very active 20 years ago for the rollback malaria initiatives, HIV/AIDS, food security. And I've been advising Dimfna and Damilola this morning that we've got the second lady, but we need some more of the first ladies to help us take the message to the heads of states. I see a number of African countries still not prioritizing clean cooking. First, they think it's a women's problem, or they think it's not as important as electrification. And I need to mobilize these first ladies to say, hell no, it is a national issue. It's not just a women's issue. And some of these other issues you've discussed, they can help us promote as well. We've had a long day. Thank you very much. We hope we can grow this forum some more. If there's any hope you can get, when I started my first energy forum in Vienna back in 2007, I initially had 400 people. The second time, 700. Then I brought Star Power. So I'm telling CCA, next time we bring Star Power, I got Schwarzenegger to come. And immediately from 700, I was at 1,600. The only downside was when he left the stage, all the cameras went with him. But I had more youth signing up that year because Schwarzenegger was coming, and we never went below 1,000 after that. So we're at 700. I'm sure in 2 years when we do this again, we'll be at 1,005. We'll bring some of the African soccer players into this space. We need star power. I give you one anecdote. We went to Hollywood, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, myself, and a few guys, to recruit some of them into the climate change discussions and so on. We left a week later. Secretary General did a speech, and when it was posted, we had 5,000 hits that looked at his speech. The same speech, a pop group took his speech, put music behind it. The first time they had already 100,000 hits. So we realized what star power can do, and I think that in our advocacy now, I'm trying to see how we bring in Nollywood actors and actresses into the clean cooking space, but also some of these big soccer players. Africa, we like our soccer very much. So again, maybe in our next conference, we'll have some of them that will bring some more young people to the space. I like what you said, Dapo, about bringing young people here, young men and women who can begin this holistic thinking we want to see going forward. Thank you very much. Tomorrow is another day. Let's make it happen. Let the clean cooking revolution begin. Thanks a lot.